I'm really pleased to introduce Secretary of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, Bill Northey. Um, One of the points that I'd like to mention is that soon after Bill became Secretary, he was able to fund a urban conservation program in the state. And so now we have four urban conservationists in the Department of Agriculture who are stationed in Dixon County, Pottawatomie County, Polk County, and Johnson County. And they are doing some good work in trying to
could possibly feed the world, and as food prices get higher and gas prices get higher, we're going to have to make a decision about how we do use our land, because some of those things that we're doing are sustainable, such as
going on in the state of Iowa. And of course, I got involved in paying a lot more attention to it. A lot of time on the road now, as well, getting around to all the areas of the state. I visit all 99 counties, about 2/3 of the way through that list again this year. Really a great experience. I grew up in northwest Iowa, up in Spirit Lake. I kind of knew that area. I knew that area down to Des Moines, but I didn't know the northeast Iowa. I didn't know southeast Iowa very well, and this is by making sure that I get to every one of those places, I don't end up with a whole section of the state that I don't get to, and it's been a great experience. We got a lot of stuff certainly going on in agriculture, so many different things. You'll know there's a lot of, in some ways, there's turmoil out there because we're trying to figure out what the prices are, and keep from hitting the microphone here. Keep figuring out what the prices are going to be, what the input costs are, what kind of farm we all want to have, and what it needs to look like, and all those things are happening at the same time. So there certainly are a lot of challenges on the farm right now. But just a couple kind of background numbers. Iowa agriculture is very, very important. It's very important to Iowa. It's about 25% of the state's economy, depending on how you cut it. If you look at the ag manufacturing, you look at ag financing, other kinds of things, that when you consider all the impact of agriculture, it's about 25% of the economy. When you look at how we compare to other states as well, historically, certainly we're number one in corn production, number one in soybean production, number one in hog production, number one in egg production, number one in biodiesel and ethanol production. Historically, we've been number 3 overall in gross sales of agriculture. California number 1, Texas number 2, Iowa number 3. Last year was the first year Texas became number 3 and Iowa became number 2. We had $19.6 billion of sales in ag products last year, and so a lot of things going on in ag. Certainly prices and yields and other kinds of things matter to that. The big ag mattered to that. At the same token, we have a lot of growth in our small ag, our direct marketing. We have 170 farmers markets. There's only 4 states with more farmers markets than what we have. All those states are a lot bigger states. So per person, we have more farmers markets than any other state. Most of us as Iowans grew up knowing where our food came from because we went out and we worked in the garden ourselves, and we went out and pulled it. And there's a tradition of that. We like to be able to know where that food came from. We had the livestock on our farm, and that's carried on as folks have left the farm. And I was just down at the Des Moines Farmers Market this morning. And a place where you go and get things, but it's also a great... We have lots of farmers markets. Grass-fed beef. We're seeing growth in dairy goats. We're seeing growth in fruit and vegetables. We've got some folks in Cedar Rapids that are looking at some processing of fresh vegetables off-season as well. In the amount of we can provide fresh fruits and vegetables, we need to be able to have some processing. Lots of different pieces, including our booth this year at the State Fair in the Ag Building, is all around the specialty crops. And it's around the things that sometimes people don't associate with agriculture because they're driving up and down, they're seeing the corn and soybean fields and hay fields and pastures. They don't see that other part, and they need to know that story as well. Certainly, one of the things I've done this year as well is get around and talk to folks about the impact of the flooding. Um, Certainly there was big impact in this area and some of the pothole areas. If you had a low ground at all, we just got a lot of rain. We had more rain the first 6 months. Phenomenal, nearly 6 months. In fact, we had about half of that in about 3 weeks. And the ground was already full of a lot of water, and that was statewide. Now, you get here and you get into northeast Iowa, and we had more than our share in those areas, because in my area of northwest Iowa, we had more than we usually do, but not damage that it did in other places. So several pieces. Certainly we had crop damage that areas along our rivers. We had problems with our specialty crops as well. They can't handle that extra water. Sometimes those are in areas that are in that good black solid soil. Real problems if it's rated or along streams where there's sand. Those are nice areas to be raising some of our specialty crops. We saw problems with that. Think of organic production this year. In fact, we got a waiver. As far as we know, we were the only state that got a waiver. The only time it's been done to be able to have some flexibility in your crop rotation, because folks that were rotating corn and soybeans and other crops in their organic rotation and getting ready to plant corn into that organic rotation never got into the field to be able to do it. You can't plant corn after, or you can't plant soybeans after soybeans, and yet it was soybeans the year before, and they got into the middle of June, into late June, and they needed to go back with soybeans in some of those fields because that's the crop that could make it. And we got a waiver from the National Organics Program to be able to allow the handful of folks that needed that to be able to do that as well. So there's, all kinds of impacts. And then, of course, impacts to our soil conservation practices out there, our terraces that are those ridges along the field that hold coming down the field. So damage to terraces, damage to grass waterways. Survey that we did out to about half of the Department of Ag is the Division of Soil Conservation, and they work on soil conservation, water quality issues, and we have folks in all the counties out here. There's local, state, and federal folks in those offices, and we did a survey out to find out what was the damage. What was the damage to terraces, grass waterways, other water retention basins on it. Normally you can expect to handle a 5-ton erosion. You're able to regenerate that, but this had 20-ton erosion on it, 10% of the land. It came at the absolute worst time, right when that soil was loose, and now that we've changed a lot of our systems from permanent vegetation into rotation vegetation. 2/3 of our land in the state is in corn and soybeans. Those plants aren't growing to the point where they can hold that soil in place. The soil had been tilled, ready to be able to plant, and you had a saturated soil, and you threw water on top of it, and some of that started to run. So there were several lessons, I think, that we look at as we came out of that, and we did some tours around to be able to look at some of the damage, what worked. In some cases, many of these things worked very well. It's just that we didn't have enough of them, or they weren't engineered strong enough to be able to compensate for the water that we had. So what we saw is certainly if we had several different practices at the same time, that helped. If we had grass waterways, terraces, and no-till in situations, or some kind of strip cropping, other kinds of ways of holding that soil in place, we saw a lot better erosion limitation in those areas than areas where we just tried to do it with just terraces but still conventional tillage, or no-till without terraces. So there were lessons there. The other piece is we saw some areas. There's some water projects down in Union County around Creston that have been there on the ground for several years. They were designed really around water quality projects for water to be able to be used for water systems, rural water systems, and urban water systems there. But they were designed such that they were designed to hold the soil in place, kind of over-engineer in some ways. The terracing, beyond just its erosion holding capacity, to be able to hold some of the water so you prevent some of the runoff that you'd normally expect. That lessens the damage to the roads, that lessens the damage to the city, and we saw less flooding. And there was a project up in Charles City that was done the same way. Actually, it was done about 25 years ago. And normally terraces are designed for about a 2-inch runoff. If you got the soil saturated and you get 2 more inches, that terrace is designed to hold that amount of water. What they did up there is, great, thank you, LeBron. What they did up there was design that for 3-inch runoff. And this was done 25 years ago. Because they were having some flooding up in the northeast part of Charles City, they designed that there, and they've had a significant reduction in the amount of flooding. They still got a little bit of flooding this year because there was so much water, but much less than they would have. And I think with all the discussion around how much runoff there was, part of that brings us to the discussion of, can we in some ways over-engineer some of our systems out here to do a better job of holding that water up on the land a little bit longer, stopping those surges. If we can prevent that surge that comes with an 8-inch rain and stretch that out over 48 hours instead of 30 minutes or an hour, we can prevent some of that flash flooding that can happen. Now, the way most of our stuff is built out here is it's built on cost share. The farmer pays 50%. The state government or federal government pays the other 50%. You can't really expect the farmer to pay for some other societal benefit. So what we would be interested in doing is having the program run the same way. So the first lesson is, can we do a better job on hydrology and considering the hydrology of what's happening out there on these farms? The second is, and that's Charles City example, some of these terraces were put in a long time ago, and they were put in and probably have done what terraces should do, catch some of the erosion that has come over time, started to fill in, and maybe they were designed for 3 inches, but now maybe operating at 2 inches or 1.5 inches. And you saw the water go down grass waterways and cut a gully along right where that soft dirt was. And so they need to be redesigned as well, and just reshaped, put back in good condition. Maybe they need, because the farmer's eaten away at that. Hasn't needed it, felt like that was a little more reshaped, and we need to look at maintenance. So first is hydrology, second is maintenance. The third thing is around what Irv mentioned is urban conservation. And while we have a lot of work to do on the farm, we certainly have a lot of work to do in our urban areas as well, increasing infiltration. Look at parking lots that weren't there 10 and 15 years ago, back in '93, and that water's all running off. Look at big box stores with big roofs, and look at small roofs that are out there in homes and other areas. And as much challenge as we have in a farm area, we have more challenges when we change that farm area to an urban area. You start paving over pieces of it. That's what we found. I was on the Soil and Water Conservation District Board in Dickinson County, and we've been working with farms for a long time, still were. But we found that as you take 40 acres of farm ground and you make that 40 acres of houses or development, you have more water quality problems and concerns with that development, especially if we do things the old way. And that's just put in concrete tubes under the road that as soon as that water hits it, they wash everything off the street right into in this case it was lakes. East Okoboji, West Okoboji, Big Spirit. And down here it's rivers. We need to continue to do more on the farm as well. That's not solved by any means. But we need to look at our urban areas, and that's why last year we were able to put on the 4 urban conservationists. We also then hired Wayne Peterson, who worked for NRCS, the federal agency, and is now working for the Department of Ag as well as our lead in urban conservation. And I think really it's time to be able to look at potentially a cost share program for some of these urban projects as well, and be able to kind of jumpstart this. This is not something we're going to be able to do everywhere, but we need a greater visibility and greater understanding of what the impacts to development are. Doesn't mean we stop them all. That doesn't mean that things can't change, but we need to be able to design it right. Once you build those concrete tubes under the ground, you don't undesign that very easily. We did a little bit of that in the lakes area. We put in rain gardens and we put in permeable paving and other kinds of things, but it's tough to do after. It's much easier to do before. And we've got some areas now that will need to be redesigned. We got Cedar Rapids. We got other small towns out there as well as we have new developing areas. And I think we need some kind of programs out there to be help jumpstart. Maybe it's not a 50% cost share, maybe it's a smaller cost share, but something that raises the visibility, that realizes that there are impacts to water quality when we look at some of the urban areas. So those are the three lessons that I think we take away from the flood. You'll likely see us bringing some pieces of this. We brought some of it to the Ag and Environment Task Force, Flood Task Force. We'll probably have something